And now let's proceed. How humans communicate with computers. There are three major categories of input and output in computing, which are the visual, audio, and physical. Though practical details are of course a bit different for how computers take input compared to humans. We'll go over this as well as the pros and cons for each category. First category is visual. It includes gestures, poses, graphics, text, UI or the user interface, screens, and animation. So, it was understandable for us that visual is which we have seen on the screen or in the computers. Then, the second is auditory. It includes music, tones, sounds, effects, wake works, and natural language processing, and diegetic, and real-world sounds. So, it's a self-explanatory that auditory is sounds that we can hear. And the last category is physical. It includes hardware, physical affordances, like buttons and edges, haptics, and anytime a user interacts with real objects. Next is visual inputs and outputs. Visual inputs is a device with a screen that displays characters or graphics or representing a data in a computer memory. Example is the keyboard, mouse, touchscreens, scanner, and others input devices. And the visual outputs can be in the form of temporary visual displays or more permanent visual printouts. Example is the speakers, printers, projector, and the monitor. They are the inputs and outputs devices wherein they are related for us or in the humans because we use this device to communicate and interact. Visual have a lot of advantages, which is why they are the most popular output type by far for most able users. Here's a rundown of advantages. First is very high density of information potential. Human can read 250 to 300 words per minute. Second, extremely customizable. Unlike physical objects, there's no limit to what can you design. Then, most words, symbols, and objects are easily recognizable and understandable to humans, unlike, say, a new controller. The training has already been done for you. Next, time independent. Visual can just hang in space forever. This makes them an excellent ambient modality. Then, visual are easy to rearrange or remap without losing user understanding. Generally, visuals based on the advantages is much easier to the humans to understand, rearrange, customize, and recognize the words, symbols, and objects because visual is a high density of information that can't losing our understanding unless if there's no one distracting you. The next, visual has disadvantages too. First is visual can be easy to miss. They are often location dependent. If the user is looking to the other way, they will simply miss it. So, if the user or we the humans looking to the other way or getting our attentions to the others, of course, we simply miss it of what our doings. And next is require prefrontal cortex for processing and reacting to complicated information, which takes more cognitive load. It is cognitively easier to hear an error tone rather than to read the word error. And yes, where it has a point also that is much easier to hear an error tone rather than to read the word error. Next is related visuals likely to interrupt if the user is in the flow. Having something unexpectedly stuck in front of your face is more jarring than unexpectedly hearing people noise, simply because in real life we can usually hear things coming and we can relate with this. For example, I am the user and now I am in the flow of what I am doing and there is something unexpectedly happen that there is a noise of people which can interrupt or distracting me, and those are the advantages and disadvantages of visuals.
Now, let's proceed to auditory inputs and outputs. Auditory inputs and outputs, it is the use of sound to communicate information from a computer to the user. It is where information is presented to you via your ears. When we say auditory inputs, it is something you connect to a computer that sends information into the computer. For example, if you want to play music on your phone and press play on the touchscreens, you're using an input device to tell your phone to play the music. Next is auditory output. It is uses speech or sounds to convey information. Or more something like auditory output refers to any device that attaches to a computer for the purpose of playing sound, such as music or speech. For example, earlier in auditory input, if you want to play music on your phone and press play on the touchscreens, you're using an input device to tell your phone to play the music. The phone will then play the music and the sound will come through an output device, which is your headphone or your speaker. Next, let's proceed to auditory inputs and outputs advantages. First is humans can understand 150 to 160 words per minute. This is even higher for those who train up on higher speed audio playback, like the blind community. In short, auditory displays enables eyes-free usage for blind users. Next is sound is omnidirectional for both input and output, freeing you to interact with your computer from any location and vice versa. Next is, unlike most visual, sound be extremely subtle and still work quite well. So when sighted users who are using their eyes for other tasks, the sound is still working quite well because it is omnidirectional for both input and output. Last, even extremely short sounds can be recognized one stop. For example, we all knew that is the sound that you receive a message. Here's the rundown of disadvantages of auditory inputs and outputs. First, easy for users to opt out and turn off the volume. Second, audio is inherently time-based. If user misses it, has to repeat it, unlike visuals, which can remain in perpetuity. For example, you are listening to an educational video. If you miss or misheard something, you have to repeat it. Next is sounds be physically off-putting, brainstem reflex, or even painful. It just means that a poorly set up or controlled sound can be so loud as to cause a possible hearing loss. If you're unlucky, it can also damage your brainstem reflexes.
Last category is physical inputs and outputs. In a sense, everything we talk about here is physical. Light hitting your eyes or the visual, sounds hitting your ears or the auditory. So these are physical qualities too, but our nervous system are wired to process them separately, hence the five senses. And I know every one of us familiar with the five senses. Next is instruments are a great example of conventional physical input and output. Though most mechanical objects fit the bill, everything from vehicles to kitchen drawers. And here are the advantages to physical modalities. First, can be very fast and precise as an input, especially peripherals that allow for small, supported fingers movements like keyboards or game controllers. Next, once training has finished, muscle memory bypasses high-level thought processes, so it's easy to move into a psychological and mental flow. Training feeds into primary motor cortex, eventually doesn't need the more intensive premotor cortex or basal ganglia processing. Next, of all the modalities, physical inputs provide the least amount of delay between affordance and input. Then the last physical inputs are the best standalone single modality input type as they allows for the most precision. Generally, physical is an input that is fast and precise. Of course, is a mental flow, which is provide the least amount and a best standable single modality input.
So here's are the disadvantage of physical output and input. First is physical input can be tiring. This is largely based on how the input is designed. For example, people can easily drive a car for hours without real physical fatigue. But an improperly designed physical input can be tiring, painful, or even damaging. So for example, a keyboard. People with wrist and hand problems can find keyboards painful to use. It can be tiring, painful, or even damaging your hand. Next is, physical inputs have higher perceived cognitive load during teaching phase when using unfamiliar peripherals. Next is, physical inputs are simply flexible than visual, because buttons can't really be moved. Lastly, physical inputs require memorization for real flow. It is because physical input devices are the input devices which has the particular hardware architecture.